Hey, how we doing? Dan Hunt here with Meraki Performance at the CatchMark podcast studio, giving you heads and tails, bringing you episode 2. We're excited for today. Appreciate everybody who might be jumping on live. I know if you're catching this right now, we're in the midst of a snow day here in West Michigan for most schools. So a lot of people at home, a lot of people enjoying the snow today. Hope everybody's staying safe out there. Again, this is Heads or Tails, a podcast that really came out of this idea that there's really two sides of program development as it relates to developing and really maximizing a team to reach their potential. And the first side is the individual, the mindset, right? And so I've had this coin in my car that I laugh because my son picks it up all the time, but it reminds me when I'm going and working with teams that there's two sides of it. There's the individual, the heads part, the individual mindset and their attitudes and belief. And then there's the tails part, right? That's the whole team and how they kind of come together and align to a common goal, vision, and really just the cohesion of that moving in the same direction. And I would say the overall mentality. And so for anybody that's a leader within an athletic team, a leader in business or a coach, you realize that we're balancing both. We're finding ourselves having conversations with individuals, but then also trying to align them with the overall culture in the team. So that's really where Heads or Tails came from. And given a more vision since last week is that we're just trying to be a resource for leaders and coaches, anybody who finds themselves really trying to lead and transform people in groups of people to be the best they can be. And so that's where this whole idea had came from. And we're super excited with Meraki Performance to be collaborating with CatchMark SportsNet and offering this to you guys. So a couple things I did want to say too is just introducing again Meraki Performance a little bit. For those that don't know, Meraki Performance is what we're saying a human performance organizational consultant. We really look to dive into and work with teams to help maximize individuals and teams to find purpose, to experience fulfillment, and to really become the best versions of themselves. And so we believe deeply that greatness is within everybody. And one of the things that I've been talking about recently with teams is that although that's within you, you don't just inherently, you're not just able to walk in that. Like there's a lot of action and discipline and things that need to go in for you to really experience that greatness or walk in it. And so we really lean into that, helping individuals and teams through a variety of services. One of which with the individual is one-on-one coaching. We come in and work with entire teams and groups of teams that many here in West Michigan have experienced, where we come in and we not only help develop the skills individually, but then we align teams together in really reaching their peak performance and their potential. We have begun to offer leadership seminars as well for athletic departments, businesses, and going in there and working with them, and begun to also keynote speak. If you're looking for somebody to come in and speak to an entire organization or an entire athletic department or school, about mental skills and performance and really reaching their potential and bringing out that greatness within. That's something that we're doing. And finally, we're super excited about this. We're diving in and working on developing a library of video courses for people that want to engage, be able to work online, to be able to go on to merakiperform.com and just access a video library of courses to kind of begin to develop the foundational skills to really bringing out that greatness within. So if you haven't and you'd like to, go ahead, check out merakiperform.com. There should be a link there if you want to sign up for our newsletter. We're sending out monthly, and we're also just going to update everybody with the services and offerings that we have, and then just continuing to encourage. Our heart is that you recognize the greatness within you and that you walk in that. And if you're a leader, that we can help equip you to be able to do that with the teams and the people that you work with. And so, yeah, we're excited again to be here. Last thing I'll say before we kind of dive in is we're really trying to keep these to about 25, 30 minutes. We understand the busy schedules you guys have as coaches and leaders and athletes. And we want to respect that. We want to give you some wisdom and encouragement. And then also on the backside of this, we have a coaches meetup That will be this coming Monday at 5:30, and I'll give the location at the end. But that's a place where you can come. We're going to meet up. We're going to talk in real time and dive into more of the content and the concepts and strategies that we talk about here at that meetup. So if you're a coach and interested in those resources and wanting some extra help, like that's a thing that we'd love to give to you. Just come out to the coaches meetup. So to recap a little bit about what episode 1 was, right? The big theme that we talked about was an overview of performance. And in our experience and research, what we have found is that there's really 3 reasons that somebody does not reach that peak performance. They do not reach their potential. And it's first a lack of clarity of what they're doing and possibly why they're doing it. And as coaches, that's something we can lean in. We talked about that last time, is creating further clarity. There's also the skill. A lot of times we're expecting things of people that they aren't yet able to do. And we need to, as leaders and coaches, be able to back a challenge off, help them develop the skill, and then increase the challenge again, which is another area that we have a high level of influence over. And then we have the third piece, and the third piece is desire. And I find a lot of times, this is where we spend tons of time digging into, is trying to cultivate this desire. And the thing is that if people don't have that intrinsic motivation, it's very difficult to cultivate that within them. Now, we can inspire them and we can push them to keep moving forward and hope that they catch that motivation, but that's really up to them, And I find it that we often waste so much energy and time talking about why and their desire, and they're not motivated, where that's probably our weakest place of influence. And I want to share with this before we start diving into kind of the way that I segment teams a lot of times when I go in and work with them. But as you look at that clarity, bringing clarity, skill, or desire, I want you to look at it this way too, is as a leader, there's 2 things that you can do. You can manage and you can hold tight and you can, I would say, close fists, like this is what needs to be done and manage things, or you can lead, right? And for anybody that has been in a leadership role before, they'll tell you the managing part of it is the worst part. The managing the different things and the different tasks and the behavior, like managing things is not what is fulfilling. What's truly fulfilling for leaders and for really anybody is to see the growth and development and to spark that change and that transformation. And so when you look at clarity, when you look at skill, when you look at desire, there's really when you're talking about desire, when you're focusing on the desire, you're just trying to manage things. You're just trying to manage the behaviors. You're just trying to get them to do what you want them to do, right? That's not leading. And so for leaders, for us to really look at and lean in, how do I create clarity, right? How do I help them develop skill, right? In what ways can I do better at creating clarity? In what ways can I help them develop a skill? That focuses more on the future and moving forward and more on the transformation and getting the most out of them. And so I want to share that as we're going in and to think about further on that skill and desire, and encourage you, for you that are really trying to lead in a really powerful transformational way, to lean into creating that clarity, right? And lean into creating further skill and helping with that skill development. And so today I want to build off of that. As we talk about, that was more of the individual, if you were to say kind of the head side of the coin. I want to flip it over and begin to talk more about the tail side, right? As it relates to the team overall, okay? And so when I go and work with teams, I'm very fortunate to be able to be brought in and be a part of the process of developing, teams and cultures. And been very fortunate to coach and work with some great teams. Over the years, what I've found is you can kind of categorize them for the most part into, I would say 3 different segments. And I first want to say that it's very easy to oversimplify team dynamics, right? Teams are very complex, okay? So for just help to create further understanding and moving forward and hopefully some encouragement of some areas you can focus on, we try to focus into 3 spaces, all right? And the first one is teams that are contained. The second one is teams that are leashed. And the third one is teams that are unleashed. All right. And I'm going to break those down. But as I've gone in and worked with teams, I've really been able to say, hey, this team's more of like a contained type team. Like they're contained. They're not able to break out. And these teams, like the potential's there. They're itching, but they're just held back. They're leashed onto something. Like something's holding them back. And then you work with these teams where they're just unleashed, right? And the student athlete is really driving the bus, and you go, whew, man, like there's something about that team. And I know you've probably played on a team, or maybe you're thinking of that team. And those are the teams that we look at and go, wow, like that, what they did was unbelievable, right? And we all want to be a part of that team and lead a team like that. And so I want to dive in first to the contained, right? And one of the first things I want to say with a team that is contained is that there is typically very little trust and no safety. All right, I'm going to say that again. There's typically very little trust and no safety. And what I mean by that is that, yes, do people believe like they're physically going to be safe? Absolutely. But there's no psychological, like there's no mental and emotional safety. Kids hold back. They have limiting beliefs. They're contained in believing really this self identity of like, we're just losers. We're not going to be able to do that. And they keep doing things and behaving in a way that reinforces that. And so some characteristics of that is obviously very low performing. They're very low performing teams. It also characteristic is that there's typically unclear goals. And I would say if there is a goal, the only goal is, hey, we just want to win, right? Which you all that work and lead in athletics, like that's great to have that desire, but there needs to be something more tangible than just we want to win. Everybody wants to win, right? There's a really poor communication. And so I would say not only is there probably no communication, there's very little communication, but when there is communication, it's not in a way that's building skill. It's probably more in a managing way, talking about, the lack of desire and managing behaviors to where we're trying to get them to go, right? And there's also little to no leadership. And that's a very critical piece as we talk about the next ones. The leadership typically comes from coaches. And again, coaches, if they're leading, they're more managing, trying to get kids to practice on time, right? Trying to get kids to execute this drill in a certain way, trying to get kids to, do their homework so they're eligible. Like it's more managing these little behaviors, which keeps you and doesn't allow you to spend the energy on really what is going to help translate into wins and performance on the field, right? There's very low morale. Like kids don't want to come to practice. Kids don't want to go to games. I would say there's a huge difference between what kids will say or how they'll, say things at practice or maybe present at practice, and then they leave and they go, man, I hate this team. Like, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't even want to show up. And it's probably, maybe even seeing where kids will show up one year and then the next year, like, I don't like it anymore, right? There's just low morale. I don't want to play that sport anymore. Obviously inadequate skills because, again, we're just hitting the ceiling and we're not being able to break through because we're so contained. We don't have that belief to keep moving forward. And then there's a lack of accountability. And I want to pause on accountability a little bit because a lot of times with accountability, we talk about, hey, how do you hold them accountable? And I want us to pause on that, especially as coaches, because first we need to display and be the example of accountability and say, this is personal accountability. This is what it looks like. And then we need to encourage our leaders within teams to explain, like to be that example and have personal accountability as well. It doesn't, like personal accountability, it doesn't begin to create because you begin to say, hey, you should do this, you should do that, right? That begins this negative flywheel that actually keeps these programs that are identified as like contained, it keeps them in that box. And if we want to break out of that, we need to have people that not only believe we can break out of that and where we're going, but also take that personal accountability of how can I influence this environment or what could I do to make it better, right? To move us forward. The other thing too with this team, last couple of things is that there's basically no performance standards. It's like the performance standards just show up. Hey, you made it, great. You put on the jersey, awesome. Like there's no performance standard. And then finally, they're very, very resistant to change. And because there is no safety and there is no trust, they take any amount of change or shifting as like, am I bad in some way, right? They take the thing personal. If you need to develop a skill or you need to do something different, it's like, oh, I'm a bad person, because they're constantly trying to protect themselves. And that, again, contained is there's really typically no safety and no trust, right? When you start talking about teams that are leashed, right? These are the teams that you see the talent, you see some kids, like they have something there. They just haven't quite figured it out, but there's something holding them back. Like, that's how I would classify a team that's leashed, right? And so there's limited trust and safety. And I would say that individuals within the team might have that trust within themselves and that confidence. They might have the belief that we could do something or we could be great, but that's not collectively experienced as a team, right? And that's your leash team. So there is some goal clarity. There is some clarity around goals. Maybe there's benchmarks throughout the year. There's specific things we want on defense or offense, or specific tenets that we're going to display. Like, there's some more clarity around that and understanding and buy-in there. Communication is beginning to be effective. You're talking about where we're going. We're talking about what needs to be done. There's a sending and receiving where people are acknowledging that there's information being passed, right? You can see that's evident through eye contact, kids head nodding, kids repeating back, kids asking questions. You can see that too, where teams begin to coach each other. The kids actually begin to coach each other, and student athletes. Like, that's when you start going, we're beginning to communicate more. People are focused on each other. They're not arms crossed and turned to the side, but people are more locked in, and there's a two-way flow of information there. You begin to see leadership. You begin to see some of those individuals that trust themselves and have confidence in themselves, have belief in what we could do. They begin to lead others. They begin to challenge others. They begin to not only display that personal accountability, but also begin to hold other people accountable. And it's a lot easier for us to accept that accountability because we see them doing it. We trust their leadership. We see what they're doing, right? We see that it's translating. You begin to have some more motivation, and there's a balance. Like, there's some hunger beginning to develop. It's not where you have to come in as a coach and you're constantly inspiring, trying to motivate them, where they actually have that motivation. There's some fire there that they're ready to bring out, right? There's some adequate level of skill as it relates to what we're trying to do on the field or the court. And they're constantly trying to refine that and become a little bit better. But a couple things here that I didn't want to highlight is that performance with this group a lot of times is very inconsistent. And so this is a group where, like, one day they come in and they're on fire and it's like the gym is hot. We're ready to roll. There's motivation. You're going, whew, man, we need this team to show up more often, right? And then the next day, you don't know why, but they kind of dip, right? And so I don't know if anybody follows Tim Elmore. Tim Elmore does a lot of work within schools, a lot with social emotional learning, and he identifies, like, you're either a thermostat or a thermometer. And so these teams a lot of times are that thermometer where, they'll come in, and if the one person isn't setting the tone, they just kind of all like, okay, whatever the temperature of the gym is, that's where we're going to be. Where we want kids to be more like, especially leaders, that thermostat is like, hey, you're coming in at 70 degrees. That's great. We need you to get up to 100 because that's where we're at, and they raise the temperature of the entire gym. They raise the temperature of the entire practice. And so performance standards become very inconsistent. Why? Because a lot of times the focus for these leashed teams, these teams that are limited, their focus is external. Their focus is still solely external and focused on not only the wins, but their playing time and different things like that, which, yes, matter, but that's their sole driver. And so it keeps them in still somewhat of a state of fear and scared and timid, if you would. And I would say, like, a great example of this is if you think of a math equation, think of, you have talent, you have some kids. It's like 1 + 1 = 2, right? You got some good kids. They could hoop. They could come play ball. But it just depends on if they show up that day, right? That's that limited, leashed team. Okay. And then you have the unleashed team, All right. You have the team that like you see like kids that are maybe less skilled or lower performing, having confidence and raising their level. And you just watch this team is more driven by the players and their belief, not only in themselves, but each other and what they can do. And these are the teams that you see have a high level of trust and there's a high level of safety, right? And so there's very, very, very clear standards and there's very clear goals. And the clear standards are around how do we show up every day and what are we going to do, right? Come heck or high water, like I don't care if it's rain and shine, whatever it is, like this is who we are, this is what we do. And the only thing that dictates our behavior is who we are, our identity, right? And so there's very, very, very clear standards and goals. And there's very effective communication. And the effective communication is constantly on how are we showing up here? How are you doing this? How am I doing that? How are we're hitting this standard? We're reaching these expectations. And how are we keeping these goals clear and we're moving us all in the same direction? There's mutual accountability to those standards. Not only are we willing to hold ourselves accountable to those personally and living those out on and off the field, but we also hold each other accountable to those. And that's a lot of times the communication that takes place is again, reinforcing that and constantly reminding us of that. There's extremely strong leadership. And I've been fortunate enough to actually coach teams where the players take the lead and the players take the drive. And that's one of the most fun places to be as a coach. When you see them driving and their desire and they're pushing and you just see them pushing each other, like it is a blast to watch and to see them really reach their potential. There's extremely strong leadership. And again, the leadership is not just to what your performance is on the field. There's a complete buy-in and care and genuine trust of we're developing you as a person too, like the whole person. There's high morale and motivation because the goals are clear, because we're developing those skills. Like the morale continues to boost and there's a high level of motivation. And the cool thing about this too is that there can be constructive conflict. And I know a lot of times we don't want conflict. We say, no, like that's bad. But really within unleashed teams, there's going to be conflict. Like people are going to butt heads a little bit. We're going to disagree. And that's what's going to help us continue to break through to the next level and continue to be unleashed, is because it's not the fact that I'm right and you're wrong or vice versa. It's the fact that this is how this is my thought. This is where I'm at. Like, this is what I believe, but I'm willing to listen to you. And we're willing to come back to this common ground of who are we and where are we going, right? And so conflict can arise because we're highly competitive, trying to be the best we can be, but it's in a way that we're pushing each other and refining each other, and we come back to a place of who are we and where are we going. And so that also feeds into strong accountability. And these teams too are very adaptive, right? They're very adaptive. It's a part of their DNA because they know where they're going. If they need to shift or pivot and move off of something to keep them going to where they need to go, they're willing to do it, because what matters more is where they're going and who they are, right? Not what we just did in like reinforcing or saying, hey, nope, I believe this because this is who I am, right? It's more about who are we as we move forward, and we don't care as much if we're wrong. And I share all that because it doesn't mean that those things don't pop up. It doesn't mean that like there's not going to be moments, but it means that we have a pathway moving forward and a common ground we come back to keep us moving forward, right? And then these teams too are very, very, very cohesive. These are the teams that you see these kids hanging out off season, in season, in between classes, at the lunchroom. You see these kids hanging out, going on vacations with each other's family. Like, these teams are highly ingrained in cohesive and connected on a level deeper than just out on the athletic field. And so it's very, very cohesive. And I would say for the math equation for this one would be like 1 + 1 = 100. And you sit there and you go, wait, that doesn't make sense. And if you think of those teams that you may have seen that are that unleashed teams, like that's what happens. A lot of times it just doesn't make sense. Like there's some phenomenal players. There's great talent. And then you see it gel together and you go like, this is crazy. I can't believe they're doing what they're doing. And it's because 1 + 1 = 100. They maximize each other. Because they are so aligned and cohesive, they're able to do more together than they ever could on their own, which is something we want out of any team. That's the overall reason why we formed teams from way back when, was because it was better for us to do things together. And from like a Stone Age perspective and an anthropology perspective, it helped us survive, right? I mean, on an athletic field, it's just a formation or a development from that original place. We want to do better and better. We want to maximize ourselves. We want to be able to bring out the best in us, and do the best that we can. And so I want you to, as I shared some of that, I want you to think about where might you be as a team? Where might you be, if you're an athlete, where might your team land in those three spaces? And again, team dynamics are pretty complex. They can be very, very complex. There's tons of nuances because we're people, right? We're complicated. But when you really zoom out, I would say to a 30,000-foot view, where would you see? Is your team more of that contained, like self-defeating? We have an identity of just almost like we're losers. Like we're not good at this, and there's no way out. It's just who we are. Or maybe you're leashed. Maybe you see, man, we're right there. We could, but we're holding back, right? There's something holding us back. And maybe you're that unleashed team, man. And if you're that unleashed team, I would say continue to talk about who you are and where you're going and getting 1% better every single day, right? But I want you to think about where might you land, right? And what would be the first thing you would do about it? Because we can lean back and we can spend tons of time saying, why, right? And I would argue that you probably asked that question so many times. Why? And I would say to ask it to begin the conversation, okay, that's good. But to sit there for a long period of time is a waste of energy, because at the end of the day, the why doesn't really matter, right? What matters is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to go about it, right? What action steps are you going to do? And so if you're a coach, I'd challenge you right now. The action step that I would take is leaning in and having this conversation with your other coaches. Hey, where are we at? Where do we fall? Where would we like to go? Where do we want to be, right? If you're a student athlete, if you're a leader on a team, or just anybody on a team, and you're saying, man, we're in this space of like, there's more potential on the table. Like there's more we can do, right? I would say, what's your what? What are you going to do about it, right? How are you going to go about it? And maybe one of the first steps is go to your coach. Say, hey, coach, like I want to change things. Things could get better. I want to be a part of this. What can we do? How can we come together, and what can we do moving forward, right? Begin to think through what are the action steps that you might take, and how might you go about that, right? And if you have any questions, that's why we're here. Meraki Performance is here to step into that gap and to help that development, right? To help move teams from that contained to maybe leashed, and even from leashed to unleashed. And if you're even that team that's unleashed, right? We want to keep building upon what you're doing and being a part of that process, right? And so I want to respect everybody's time, keeping it close to 30 minutes. But think about that today. Have this conversation. Maybe share this podcast with some of your teammates. Begin to have this conversation and see what the path forward is. Because if we sit in the why and we stay there, the why is just a wall that we keep trying to figure out why. And you might never know why, right? But we can figure out what we can do and how we can go about it, all right? And so as we wrap up today, I just want to ask first, thank you for being here. That's not an ask. That's just thanking you for being here. I appreciate your time. There's two things in this world that really are priceless that we can't purchase, and that's time and energy and attention. And I'm grateful that you gave that to us listening. I want to encourage you to keep moving forward. It's not always easy, right? It's not always easy, but it's the journey that's most fulfilling, and the constant getting better every single day, all right? I would love for you guys to check us out at MerakiPerform.com, Meraki Perform, at Meraki Perform, on social media, any social media platform. Feel free to connect with us. ask questions. Again, if you found this beneficial, share it with a friend, right? Share it with a coworker, share it with another coach, and ask questions. We would love to answer real-time questions that you have right now as you're navigating, situations within your program and your journey in developing. And then finally, we would love to have you out to our Heads or Tails meetup, which will be next Monday. I believe that's the 15th of January at 5:30 at the Sports Page Grill on Holton Whitehall Road, North Muskegon. So we're going to be there. Come on out. Let's connect. Let's talk more. We'd love to just encourage you, invest in you, answer some questions you might have. And like always, stay safe out there. Keep building. Greatness is within you, one step at a time.